You know, the AI boom, it feels like it's absolutely everywhere, right? But something strange happens when you really start to dig into the financial plumbing that's propping it all up. You begin to see well, these echoes of past crashes, but this time with some new twists that are frankly a lot more worrying.
So what if I told you the AI bubble isn't what it looks like on the surface? What if the real story, the one we should all be paying attention to, isn't if this thing pops, but what happens to all of us when it does? Because the system we've built could make the fallout from an AI crash, well, way, way worse than you might think.
I mean, let's be honest. Pretty much everyone agrees that AI looks like a bubble. It's got all the signs. But that's usually where the conversation just stops. So today, we're going to push past that. We're not going to ask if it pops. We're going to ask what happens when it does. Because the next crash, it could be a totally different kind of monster.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at overexposed households. Then, what I'm calling the empty toolbox. After that, we dive into the shadow system. And finally, we'll ask the big question. Is this a crisis that can even be contained?
Okay, let's jump right into reason number one, overexposed households. This is all about how Main Street, regular people, are tied to the market like never, ever before.
Think about this number for a second, 30%. Right now, a record-breaking 30% of all of America's household wealth is sitting in the stock market. That is a huge shift from the past, and it puts regular folks in a completely different and much more fragile position.
So here's what that really means. When a massive part of the market is floating on AI hype, a crash doesn't just hurt Wall Street anymore. It could be absolutely devastating for household wealth. Back in 2008, that crisis wiped out about 20% of household wealth. Today, with that 30% exposure, well, you can do the math. The potential for damage is just so much higher.
All right, so we've established that households are way more vulnerable. But wait, can't the government just step in and fix things like they usually do? Well, that brings us to reason number two, the empty toolbox. The government has way less room to fight a crisis this time around. Just look at this. In 2007, right before the big crash, the U.S. debt compared to its economy, the debt to GDP ratio, was around 60%. Today, it's sitting at about 120%. It is literally doubled. That is a massive, massive change.
And what this really means is there's just not much wiggle room left. In past crises, the government's playbook was simple. Borrow a ton of money and spend it to get the economy going again. But when your debt is already this high, it gets a lot harder to just print and spend your way out of trouble. The safety net we've always relied on, it's a whole lot smaller.
Okay, now for our third reason. And this part is easy to miss, but I'm telling you, it changes everything. We need to talk about the shadow system, this huge, unregulated part of the finance sector that's bigger than it has ever been.
So, what on earth is shadow banking? Well, think of it like this. It's a whole world of financial companies that act a lot like banks. They lend money, they manage assets, but they do it all without the same strict regulations or, and this is the key part, without the government safety nets. So, on one hand, you've got your regular, regulated banks. They face heavy rules, but in return, they get a government backstop, like emergency loans from the Fed. On the other hand, you have the shadow banks. They have very light regulation, which they love, but it comes with a catch. There's absolutely no government backstop when things go wrong. It's the ultimate high-risk, high-reward game.
And here's the twist. Here's where the danger really lies. Imagine the AI bubble pops. What happens next? Investors panic, and they all rush to get their money out at the same time. A normal bank could call the Fed for an emergency loan. A shadow bank? It's on its own. It fails. And that failure can set off a catastrophic chain reaction. It's basically a bank run, but in the shadows.
This isn't just theory, by the way. We saw this exact thing play out in 2008. Remember Bear Stearns? That was a shadow bank that got so huge it became too big to fail, and the government had to step in. But here's the kicker. As big of a problem as that was back then, the shadow system today it's just astronomically bigger.
Get ready for this number. $3 trillion. That's just one corner of this world, the private credit market. And it's about 10 times bigger than it was back in 2008. That is just a staggering amount of money operating completely outside the normal, regulated system.
And it's not just that one market. Now we have entirely new players in the shadow system. We're talking about that $3 trillion private credit market, plus a rapidly growing stablecoin industry. Think about it. These are basically digital dollars acting like bank deposits, but with zero insurance, zero protection. So the system hasn't just gotten bigger, it's gotten weirder and more unpredictable.
Okay, so let's put all the pieces on the table. We're asking, could a crisis be uncontained? Well, let's see. We've got more risk for regular people, fewer tools for the government, and a giant, mysterious financial system bubbling just beneath the surface.
So what this really boils down to are three core vulnerabilities. 1. Households are way more exposed to a stock market crash than ever before. 2. The government has less fiscal space, less ammo to fight back. And 3. This larger shadow banking system is creating all sorts of unpredictable risks that we can't even see clearly. It's kind of the perfect storm.
Which brings us to the final unsettling question. With so much more risk in the system, so much less room for the government to maneuver, and a shadow financial world that's bigger and murkier than ever, what happens when the next domino falls?